The massive ship descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday afternoon. It was 3 kilometers long, shaped like a curved blade, and it blocked out the sun over most of New York City. The galactic hegemony had finally arrived to claim their newest territory. Supreme Overlord Krithax stood at the bridge of his flagship, his 7 eyes scanning the primitive blue planet below. His scales gleamed purple under the artificial lights, and his ceremonial armor had been polished for this historic moment. Behind him stood 12 of his most trusted generals, each one a decorated warrior who had conquered dozens of worlds. Today, Krithax announced in his deep voice, we add another species to our empire. The humans will kneel before us, just as all others have done. His generals clicked their mandibles in approval. They had reviewed the intelligence reports. These humans had only recently developed nuclear weapons. They had not even colonized their own moon properly. Compared to the hegemony's 1,000-year empire spanning 300 star systems, Earth was nothing but a small rock filled with confused primates. The ship landed in Central Park, crushing several trees and a hot dog stand. Krithax descended the main ramp with his entire honor guard. He wore his crown of absolute authority, a twisted metal thing that had made entire civilizations weep with fear. His tail dragged behind him, leaving marks in the grass. A crowd had gathered around the landing site. Police officers were trying to establish a perimeter. News helicopters circled overhead. People were recording everything on their phones. Krithax raised all 4 of his arms and spoke in a voice that had been amplified by translation technology. People of Earth, I am Supreme Overlord Krithax of the Galactic Hegemony. Your planet now belongs to us. Bow before your new masters and accept your fate. There was a long moment of silence. Then someone in the crowd shouted, Yo, he looks like a purple lobster. Laughter erupted from the gathered humans. Krithax felt his scales flush with confusion. This was not the reaction he had expected. On every other world, his appearance had caused terror. Beings had fallen to their knees and begged for mercy. A woman near the front pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Can I get a selfie with you? My kids would love this. Silence. Krithax roared. I am the Supreme Overlord. I have conquered 300 worlds. I have destroyed civilizations that were old when your species was still climbing trees. An old man with a newspaper tucked under his arm pushed through the crowd. Yeah, that's nice, buddy. But you're blocking traffic. Can you move your spaceship? Some of us have places to be. General Vorthen leaned close to Krithax. Supreme Overlord, I do not understand. They should be terrified. Our psychological warfare experts predicted mass panic and immediate surrender. Krithax watched as a young human child approached one of his guards, a massive warrior named Threk, who had personally killed over 1,000 enemies in combat. The child looked up at Threk's fearsome form, his razor-sharp claws, his rows of teeth. Cool costume, mister, the child said. Are you from a movie? Threk looked at Krithax with all 5 of his eyes wide with confusion. Supreme Overlord, what is a movie? Before Krithax could answer, a man in a business suit walked up to him. Listen, I work for the city. You can't just park here without a permit. There's a process. You need to fill out forms, get approval from multiple departments. Also, you crushed Frank's hot dog stand, and he's going to want compensation. I am conquering your planet, Krithax shouted. I do not need permits. The businessman shrugged. That's what the last guy said. Look, I've got the forms right here. Just fill them out, and we can sort this whole thing out properly. Krithax stared at the papers being thrust toward him. His mind was struggling to process what was happening. He had done this hundreds of times before. He would land, make his announcement, and the local population would immediately recognize his authority. There would be some resistance at first, but once they saw the power of his weapons, they would submit. A television news crew pushed through the crowd. A reporter with perfect hair shoved a microphone toward Krithax's face. Sir, hi. Jessica Wong, Channel 5 News. Quick question. Are you here legally? Do you have a visa? Because if not, immigration is going to have some questions for you. I do not need visas. Krithax felt his voice becoming shrill. I am the supreme overlord of the galactic hegemony. Right, Jessica nodded. But that's not really recognized by international law. Have you spoken with the United Nations yet? They usually handle this sort of thing. General Mortax stepped forward. Perhaps a demonstration of our power would help these creatures understand their situation. Supreme Overlord, permission to fire upon one of their structures? Krithax nodded eagerly. Yes, destroy something. Show them what happens to those who mock the hegemony. Mortax aimed his plasma cannon at a nearby building and fired. The beam struck the structure, leaving a large scorch mark on the concrete facade. The humans watched with mild interest. Huh, said a construction worker nearby. Yeah, my drill does worse damage than that. What kind of weapon is that thing running on? It is a Class 7 plasma projector. Mortax snarled. It can vaporize steel. The construction worker examined the scorch mark. I mean, it kind of singed the paint, I guess. You might want to get that thing looked at. Krithax felt something he had never experienced before in his centuries of conquest. He felt embarrassed. This was not how things were supposed to go. Where was the fear? Where was the panic? Where were the desperate pleas for mercy? A group of teenagers had gathered nearby. They were pointing at the alien warriors and laughing. One of them was doing an imitation of Krithax's walk, exaggerating the way his tail dragged behind him. The others were recording it and cackling. Supreme Overlord, General Vorthan said quietly, perhaps we should retreat to the ship and reconsider our approach. No. Krithax refused to be humiliated. Bring out the war beasts. Release the Graxian hounds. Let them see what true terror looks like. The cargo bay doors opened, and a dozen massive creatures bounded out. They were the size of small cars, covered in black scales, with multiple rows of teeth and claws that could tear through armor plating. On every other world, the sight of Graxian hounds had caused entire armies to flee. A woman in yoga pants walked up to one of the beasts. Oh my God, aren't you just the cutest thing? She reached out and scratched behind one of its ear-like appendages. The Graxian hound, a creature that had killed millions across the galaxy, began to wag its tail. Its tongue lolled out of its mouth, and it rolled over to have its belly rubbed. Good boy, the woman cooed. Who's a good murderous alien creature? You are. Yes, you are. The other Graxian hounds had wandered off to sniff fire hydrants and chase pigeons. One of them was happily accepting hot dog pieces from a street vendor. Krithax stood frozen in disbelief. Behind him, he could hear his generals muttering among themselves. This was a disaster. Word would spread throughout the hegemony. The Supreme Overlord had been made to look like a fool by a species that could not even travel faster than light. An elderly woman approached Krithax with a Tupperware container. You look hungry, dear. Have some cookies. They're chocolate chip. I just made them this morning. I do not want your cookies. I want your submission. Well, you're not getting any submission until you've had something to eat. You're too skinny. All of you are. Don't they feed you on that spaceship? Against his will, Krithax found himself accepting a cookie. He bit into it. It was, he had to admit, delicious. One of his generals reached out and took several more. A police officer walked up to Krithax. Okay, look. I've been on the radio with my captain. Here's the deal. You can park your ship here for now, but you need to move it by Thursday. There's a concert scheduled. Also, if you want to do any conquering, you need to take it up with the mayor's office. They're open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. But it is Tuesday. Krithax protested. Yeah, well, you should have landed earlier. Office closed 2 hours ago. You'll have to come back tomorrow. Krithax looked at his generals. They looked back at him. For the first time in their long careers, none of them knew what to do. A man selling t-shirts had set up shop nearby. He was already selling shirts with Krithak's face on them, along with the caption, "I survived the alien invasion of Central Park." Another design featured a Graxian hound with the text, "Who's a good intergalactic terror? How much for one of those?" General Threk asked, pointing at the shirts. $20. 30 if you want the premium quality. Threk looked at Krithak's. Supreme Overlord, what is a buck? 3 hours later, Krithak's was sitting in a coffee shop near the park. Someone had explained to him that he needed to wait for business hours to continue his conquest. His generals were scattered around the shop, sampling various human beverages. One of them had become obsessed with something called caramel macchiato. A young man sat down across from Krithak's. "So, you're really from outer space, huh?" "Yes, I am the Supreme Overlord of the Galactic Hegemony." "Cool, cool. So, what's the healthcare situation like in your empire?" Krithak's blinked several of his eyes. "I do not understand the question. Healthcare. You know, like if someone gets sick, does the empire cover their medical costs? Or is it a private system? If someone in the empire gets sick and cannot work, they are disposed of." The young man nodded slowly. "Okay, so it's about on par with what we've got here." "Got it." Krithak's felt his head spinning. These humans were impossible. They did not fear him. They did not worship him. They just went about their strange little lives as if his presence meant nothing at all. A notification appeared on his communicator. It was a message from the Hegemony High Council, demanding a status report. They wanted to know if Earth had submitted yet. They were expecting tribute payments to begin immediately. Krithak's looked around the coffee shop. One of his generals was arguing with a barista about the proper ratio of milk to espresso. Another had started a friendly conversation with a group of college students about the mathematical principles underlying faster-than-light travel. A third was teaching an old man how to play a hegemony card game. What was he supposed to tell the council? That the humans had defeated his invasion through sheer indifference? That his terrifying war beasts were now being walked around the park by enthusiastic dog lovers? That his fearsome warriors were developing a coffee addiction? A little girl walked up to him with a piece of paper and crayons. "Can you draw me a picture of your spaceship?" Krithak's looked at the child. He looked at the crayons. He thought about the hundreds of civilizations he had brought to their knees. He thought about his reputation, his legacy, his 1,000 years of conquest. Then he picked up a purple crayon and started to draw. Perhaps, he thought, conquest could wait until after coffee hour.